This podcast is brought to you by Truth First, an organisation designed to help you live a better life. I am Dr. Andrea LaFountain, your own personal psychologist and theologian. Welcome to the series. Today we are going to be talking about integrity, and I want to give you some tips on how you can live a life of integrity. I was reading the Gospel of Matthew this morning, which was quite serendipitous given I was looking to do a recording on integrity. And I was reading the story where Jesus is giving a pretty heavy rebuke to the Pharisees because on the one hand, they talk a good talk, but they do not walk a good walk. And this is the problem of hypocrisy. Jesus is calling them out fairly brutally. As Jesus does in the Gospels, he speaks plainly, and that's a sign of his integrity and his authenticity. He says what he means to say. The Pharisees, which you may know, are the folks in biblical times who were well studied and educated in the law, in the Old Testament law, and they were the teachers of the Old Testament law. But what Jesus is calling out here is that they may talk it, but they don't live it out. He warns the disciples right at the very beginning of chapter 23. He says, "Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, 'The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach.'" So Jesus is making it very clear here that even though they are good teachers, they are not living the word. And now he even goes on later in chapter 23 to tell them that their spouting righteousness and their ability to preach the law is no guarantee that they are saved or they are going to heaven. In fact, in verse 33, he says to them, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell?" So the rebuke can't get any more significant than that. A very interesting and I think kind of funny term that Jesus uses to describe the Pharisees, he calls them whitewashed tombs. That reminds me of one of my favorite old Irish movies, Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And the granny is talking about a gentleman in the village. This is the movie that has Sean Connery when he was probably only in his 20s. And the granny talks about this man being proud. She says he's as proud as a whitewashed pig. And that just came to my mind when I was reading Jesus' remark, whitewashed tombs. Both of them have this idea that on the outside, the whitewash is covering up a multitude of, dirt underneath. The pig is considered one of the dirtiest, muckiest animals on the farm. You slap a bit of whitewash paint on it, it's still the same animal. And Jesus is using the term whitewashed tombs. So the tomb might look elaborate in the graveyard with all of its ornate carvings and sculptures and its clean whitewashed paint, but really what's inside the tomb is death and decay and rot and stench. So this is what Jesus is seeing when he looks at the Pharisees. They look clean on the outside, but they are far from clean on the inside. The verse that I'm referring to is in chapter 23 of Matthew, verse 27, says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean." In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. And then he gives another example. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean." So Jesus is here calling the Pharisees hypocrites because they know what they're supposed to do and they're teaching others how to live a good life, but they themselves are not. And the consequences of that, Jesus makes clear here, are very, very consequential. So we can learn from good teachers of the law, but be careful when you choose to emulate or esteem those teachers. What you really need to be looking for in those you esteem and emulate are that they are actually living the gospel life. They are living a Christ-like life. And Christ obviously is the ultimate person to follow. And that's why we always need to fix our eyes on Jesus and not teachers of the law or Pharisees, because who knows what's going on in the inside of those folks. So if you see the fruit of the Holy Spirit in them, then, use them as a role model. And those fruits are specified in Galatians chapter 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, understanding, generosity. If you see that in somebody's life, whether they're talking a good talk or not, they would be the kind of person you want to follow. Now, getting back to this idea of integrity, integrity is that we are who we say we are. When you align with a person of integrity and they say to you, "I will meet you there at 6:00, then they are going to meet you there at 6:00. Or if they say, "I'll drive you to the airport," or "I will look after your child," or "I will join you on this business adventure and I will look out for your best interests and not mine." A person of integrity, their word is true and you can trust them and you can rely on their word. That's the kind of people we want to be. Now, the Pharisees in their day were esteemed. They had wealth. They wore fancy clothes. They held their head high, all in a position of this authority. They were the whitewashed pigs walking around proudly. But there's another story in the Bible where the Pharisees are giving their tithes and offering to the church, and they're making a big deal out of it. They're clanking their coins into the metal box. Jesus contrasts that to a poor widow who comes and she gives her last penny. And Jesus says that woman, the poor woman who has given from her poverty, has given way, way more than the wealthier people who are making a clanging display of their giving. Jesus says, well, you've already got your reward. You were giving that because you wanted men to see you give it, and they've seen you give it, so you got your reward. The poor old widow was giving out of her poverty, and she was giving because she loved God. And that reward will come back to her, doubled over in God's love back to her. So now comes the question, what do we do with this? How do we grow in our integrity? So that we have to now ask the question, well, what is in our hearts? What is on the inside of our cup? Whatever it is we're presenting on the outside, whatever that whitewash is, whether it's nice fashionable clothes or the car we drive or the house we live in or the job that we have, all of these are outside factors that, passerbys can look and see. But what do they see on the inside? What would Jesus see when he looks at the inside? Passersby don't often correctly gauge what we have on the inside. We can put on fancy clothes, we can put on a smile, even a fake smile, and maybe 9 times out of 10 people are taken in by that. Jesus is never taken in by that. And sometimes we even fool ourselves when we put on, some fancy clothes and a smile, and we engage positively with the world, despite there being inner ruin inside. So, the challenge here to not be a Pharisee, to not be clean on the outside, but full of dead men's bones on the inside, is, you got to figure it out, what's going on inside. Take some time. What is it that you have inside you that Jesus just does not approve of? For me, I can make a confession here that, I carry bitterness towards, a few people who have, been mean and wronged me in my life. And I need to get past that. I can ask God to give me his compassion for them. All of the people who offended me, every single one of them is a sinner, the same as you and me. Can I look at them that way and have God's compassion on the sinner and maybe get past the bitterness there? The Bible recommends we should pray for our enemies. That's definitely a good way to see them with compassion, because everybody needs compassion. Everybody needs forgiveness from God. And I'm sure God is forgiving them for the hurts that they've cast towards me. Who am I to withhold that? So those are the kind of things that I process in my inner world to deal with the inner dirty cup that Jesus is challenging us all to clean out. So I don't know what is in your inner cup. What kind of cleaning do you need to do? But take some time and think about it. Some of them will come to your mind fairly readily. Others you might need to take a little bit more time just in silence, waiting for the Holy Spirit to convict you of what it is that's inside you that is distasteful, and he's asking you to clean that out. Now, the good news always is that Jesus is there to do the cleaning with us. The Holy Spirit's function in us, in his wisdom and in the graces that we have from God, is to do that cleaning. We don't have to do that by ourselves. So take heart in that. Whatever that inner grime is, you can clean it out with the grace of God. So that's my challenge to you today. If you want to live a life of integrity and you want to live a life of peace that comes through being a genuine person for God, genuine in your love of God, and genuine and courageous in allowing God to do inside you what only he can do. But you need to be open to his invitation for that cleaning. So I will be praying for you as you allow the Holy Spirit to do that work in you. Just surrender into him and give it all to him, and he will give you his peace, and you will live a life of integrity. God bless.